listening to Food Rebels. This is the podcast that brings you brands, chefs, and live on-air tastings. Show that's dedicated to the more rebellious side of the food world, where we celebrate the people who've challenged the status quo. You know me, I'm the show host, AJ Sharp, taste expert, food writer, great taste food judge, business owner. And with me today, we have our producer, co-host, Georgie Parsons. Welcome back.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Well, thanks for being here. Now, I wanted to talk today a little bit about ultra-processed food. It's a bit of a different episode today. We're not going to do a tasting. We're just going to kind of talk around the topic of ultra-processed food because it is just in the press absolutely everywhere. And I think it's one of those things people are asking a lot of questions about it, trying to understand what it means.
Yeah, it's a really hot topic at the moment.
It's a really hot topic. I really wanted to get your take on it, Georgie, because I know you're really good, aren't you, at kind of looking at, you know, the ingredients, making sure you don't have sugar in things that you don't need sugar. And what I learnt was that if it isn't an ingredient that you keep in your food cupboard, i.e. something like an emulsifier or, you know, something like that.
I remember someone saying, if you can't draw it,
don't
eat it.
Very good.
And yeah, if you don't understand what it means, monosaturator, you know, all these words that are put into your food, if you don't know what that is, you shouldn't be eating it.
Yeah.
I do really follow that as much as I possibly can. However, I'm also going to caveat this. There is also quite a backlash against this ultra-processed food movement of people complaining about it because it has given us, from the feminist standpoint, it has given women more time because it has made food quicker, easier, more available. Full-time working mothers who can come home and shove something straight in the oven and they can feed children and themselves, and basically it's been a huge helping hand to women who normally would have been doing all the kind of home cooking from scratch. And by telling people not to eat ultra-processed foods, you're basically saying you need to make everything from scratch. And that is not a realistic conversation because we can't all make everything from scratch and we can't all be looking at stuff all the time. And there's a price issue. The ultra-processed foods are cheaper. So actually, I don't think you should be vilifying the people who are buying the ultra-processed foods. It should be the people who are making the ultra-processed foods should be doing more to stop their products having the ultra-processed in it. And I think that's a really key point because it seems to full on women who do the majority of the cooking, the shopping, the buying, everything, to then have this other pressure put on top of them to say, stop using these quick convenience things and start making stuff from scratch again. And it's just not realistic to people's lifestyles. And, you know, more and more people are having to have dual incomes and not being able to stay at home to men or women to do that.
Right. I think there's a middle ground. I completely agree with everything you're saying there. And the passion with which you've shared that, I feel exactly what you're saying. This is me. This is my life. I definitely don't feed my kids the perfect stuff because of this reason. But I think there's a middle ground between ultra-processed food. So, you know, the loaf of bread that doesn't go off for 3 weeks because it's just full of all sorts of crap. And then there's the bought sourdough that's come from a bakery or something like that does go off after 5 days, that is actually made with very natural ingredients, which is not ultra-processed, but it is still convenient because you can buy it.
Yes, but what's the price difference?
Huge.
89p.
Huge.
For a loaf of ultra-processed, £5.50 for a sourdough. This is where the conversation is going, isn't it? Because we are telling the society who have got the least amount of money to spend, everything they're buying is wrong.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't be buying that. And how dare they should be feeding that to their children, and look what they're doing to them. But that's not their fault. They didn't put all those preservatives into that bread. They did not make that bread in that way. So it is the companies, and this is where it should fall back onto the companies to be changing their ways, not using the products that they're using to make that loaf last. You know, probably once they've got it at home, that loaf's it's going to be eaten within 4 or 5 days. Do you know what I mean? They actually, they've got to change the way that they're selling their products, and it's got to come from the companies. And it's this more what the government should be doing is being more pressure on them than telling people that they're doing something wrong.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think it comes down to convenience, doesn't it? Because for these bread brands, for example, and it's convenient for them to have a longer shelf life because they can sell more, less of it gets thrown away. And I'm all for reducing food waste, but it's come down to their convenience, not the health of the end user.
Oh, no, there's nothing about the health of the end user. It's the shelf life, which they can then keep their product out there for longer, and then they don't have so many issues with it going off. But it does slightly, as you can probably tell, just slightly rile me that it's the consumer who's being vilified here, and actually we should be doing more working with the companies to make them more accountable.
Because the next stage then is that the government put in more, all of that kind of ultra fat, high sugar.
Tax, is it?
The tax. It's putting in more tax, isn't it? So the government's making money. They don't really care about the end goal. They're just going to make money, but it looks like they've taken some effort, but they haven't really. You're putting more pressure then on an already incredibly restricted, incredibly regularized industry, making it even harder for food brands to succeed, making it even harder for people to get through. The only people who can really do it are the huge manufacturers.
Yeah.
Who then are benefiting from all the loopholes and other things and being able to put pressure on the government to just sway the legislation slightly so it works better for them. And it's the small brands, you know, the people we champion, the people that Food Rebels want to talk to, that are then having to pick up the slack, I think, a lot of the time with those kind of legislation. I think the second part about making the government make legislation is, again, by removing the opportunity to make food, whether it's right or wrong, you're taking away the choice again from the consumer. And we're becoming even more of a nanny state. We're becoming even more of you can't do anything. You can't ever sway outside of what's right.
Yeah.
You never get the choice. It's just like that choice has been taken away from you. That choice has been taken away from you. And I find that frustrating as well.
Yes, I do agree that I do also genuinely think education is really important. And, you know, there are, say, let's take nuts, for instance. You can buy a packet of nuts, which is not ultra processed. It hasn't got anything on it. It might have a bit of sea salt, fine. But then you can go up and then there are other brands that then take a normal nut to then an ultra processed nut by putting a whole load of it through a whole load of different flavors and salts and all sorts of additives that they then put on it to make you want to eat it more. So you think you're eating a nut, and that bag of nut is the same as this bag of nuts, but it's not. They're totally different. One is ultra processed and this one isn't. It's also then showing people that still eat the nuts, but just be more
Labeling.
Yes,
Yeah.
it should have labeling on it. This is an ultra processed food, because you think, oh, I'm eating a nut. This is healthy, and this is all the stuff that I've been told I need to eat more, you know, nuts and berries. Great, but actually you're not helping yourself on that.
Interesting, isn't it? So maybe like the kind of, the traffic light system on the nutritional information about fat and sugar and salt and all that stuff, should there actually be one for processed?
Yeah.
Like a traffic light system of red, this is highly processed. This, you know, strawberry chew has actually never met a strawberry in its entire life. To, you know, another sweet brand, something that's actually quite good, that's very low processed, that is just strawberries that have been kind of ironed out into a flat sheet that are much closer to a strawberry. And then green, this is just a dry strawberry or a fresh strawberry.
Yeah, I think the problem is, I think it's very difficult to put those set parameters in place, and I think there's a lot of crossover and there's lots of and I think that is where the problem probably has come with labeling, because I know they have talked about doing labeling for this before, but I don't think there's any agreement on where the levels are and where you can put the different sections on. But
I can see that, and I can see even there, me saying that, who writes the guide that decides on every item of confection, every item of nuts, to your example, crisps, whatever.
Yeah.
Who decides
on what's good and what's bad? Yeah.
Whether something is or isn't ultra processed. I think the essence of the movement, the understanding, the topic is a good one. I think for all of us to actually look at the things that we are putting into our bodies and going, this is ultra high processed, or actually it's processed, but do you know what? It still looks like the thing it was. Yeah. It still looks like the chicken breast, or it still looks like, you know, I can see oats in this biscuit. It hasn't been mucked about with too much. I think that awareness level's pretty good for us.
Yeah, and I think schools are actually doing a lot at the moment, and they are trying to bring in more understanding of eating more kind of natural whole produce, and I think that is trickling home to people saying, oh, actually, I don't really want to, for instance, I know at our school they've been talking a lot about like sugar added to snacks. And then the children have come home and said, actually, I don't really, because every day I pick up my kids, what's the snack? What's the snack? And they've actually started rejecting some snacks because they've been like, oh, no, I've been learning that one's got lots of sugar in it, or that's got, so then they're more wanting a piece of fruit or, say, a flapjack or something rather than something that is really a chocolate bar.
Highly processed.
Yeah, so I found that really interesting that's actually coming from it's coming up from the other end now. And that's really where it should be coming from, because education is everything, I think, on these.
We're a product of, certainly I'm a product of an 80s upbringing where the convenience food was king. My mother worked full time, my father worked full time. Microwave meals, microchips, McCain's microchips, that was the latest thing. And we were all very excited about this microwave. We were excited about the speed at which we could cook things. We were all talking about how marvellous the microwave was. It was all about convenience food, fast, everyone was busy.
Yeah.
And
nobody looked at ingredients though either. And I think that's probably what's happened, is that these companies have managed to throw a whole lot of stuff in because we weren't looking.
Yeah.
And now we've started looking because there's been side effects and there's been issues and, it's causing diseases and all this kind of stuff. And now suddenly we're like, oh, actually, maybe we should have a look and see what's going into the food we're eating. And suddenly now we're like backpedaling from what we didn't even notice.
Yeah, I think that's true. And just understanding where this food is coming from and how it's been like this.
And also because you only saw the pros, yeah?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, piece of bread doesn't go off. It doesn't go off. Can you imagine that? I mean, it was so annoying when your loaf of bread went off, and now this one doesn't go off. I mean, you would just think, gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, food was very natural, even though I grew up in the 80s and we were excited by microwave chips. There wasn't that much other things that we were having that were processed. Nearly everything was being made, from scratch. But we had simpler food then. A jacket potato with Sunday roast, leftover meat and some baked beans out of the tin.
Meat and two veg.
Yeah.
It was meat and two veg, wasn't it? I mean, and that really is what kind of...
That was Monday night.
Yeah.
And Tuesday night might have just been a piece of fish and some rice or something.
Yeah.
I say just. It was lovely. I loved it. My mum's a great cook. But it was simpler time. It was simpler food. I even remember Mum coming home having bought a pour-on sauce that you just put over the chicken, chicken
sizzle,
or whatever.
Sizzle on something, wasn't it?
Something like that.
Yeah.
But the sort of precursor to a chicken tonight sauce. And that being quite wowie at the time. She was like, it's marvellous. I just throw the chicken in, pull it out 10 minutes before the end, throw the sauce on, and suddenly I've got a whole meal. All I have to do is some rice and veg.
Yeah.
And it was like, I do remember being excited by this, whereas now I feel guilty if I've fed my kids something that has a sauce out of a jar.
Well,
I do it all the time. Don't get me wrong, but I feel guilty about it.
No, well, I think when I was reading up about mayonnaise, as you do.
Always. That's Friday night.
Reading up about mayonnaise. Well, Hellmann's have changed their recipe hugely since from when they first started. So when they first started, they didn't have any preservatives in, they didn't have any added crap. And it was like a pure homemade mayonnaise.
Wow.
Now, over the years, you can document it and you can see where they've started to add in all the stabilizers, all the fillers, all the, other gums and whatever it is else they put in it, because they wanted to make their product last longer on the shelf or all that kind of stuff. So the companies that were starting out in this really purist form, going, I'm going to take my homemade mayonnaise and sell it, have just totally changed their direction and tact. And now, so when you first started buying Hellmann's, you thought, okay, amazing, this is a really nice mayonnaise. And then over the years, it's just been tweaked and messed with, and now it's just really full of rubbish, really full of rubbish. But also what really annoys me is that you don't need to make mayonnaise like that, because there are other brands who don't have all that rubbish in, who are still got a very stable product and all that kind of stuff. It's just, but again, cost. These things are all cheaper. It's
like you always talk about the Truckleman's mayonnaise being a lot better.
We love Truckleman's. Always go back to again. No sugar in Truckleman's mayonnaise. How many mayonnaises have sugar? How many products? Because I only know this because I had to give out sugar. So knowing how many products You don't even think about it. I went to a supermarket to try and buy a takeaway lunch. You know, one of those, go to the supermarket, they have the lunch and go, grab and go sections, don't they? Every single item had sugar in it. Sushi. I thought, great, sushi wouldn't have sugar in it. The sushi rice, cooked in sugar.
Really?
The bread for sandwiches has sugar in it. The wraps, sugar and thing. Even the salads in the salad dressing had sugar. So eventually the only thing I could eat was a salad without a salad dressing. That was the only thing I could buy. And that is wrong. That is wrong. You know, you talk about kind of ultra processed foods. It's that like other level of things, of stuff that is put in that is totally unnecessary.
Empty calories in an obesity crisis in the country, and you just think somebody's bought this salad.
Spiking your sugar level, your glucose level and everything, and you just think...
But it's that classic thing, isn't it? You know, everyone's being told to eat more healthily, and you go and get your salad, and you don't necessarily know to check the sugar content because you're going, well, it's a salad. It's going to be green, isn't it? It's going to be brilliant.
But you wouldn't think to check a sugar content of a sandwich.
No.
Yeah? So you get the bread has got sugar in it. The mayonnaise, which is in, say you had a chicken mayo sandwich, the mayonnaise that you've got in there has got sugar in it. You know, it's literally like...
In everything.
Everything. It's in everything. And that blew my mind when I started going into it, and that's why I started looking for all these alternatives, because I had to, but it just meant I could not eat on the go. I could not turn up somewhere. You know, the only product that I could eat was the egg and spinach. You know, you can get those hard-boiled eggs with a couple of spinach leaves. Oh my goodness, they're disgusting.
Ugh, yeah.
Have you tried one?
No.
Oh.
I just look at them and think, no.
Who buys that? Exactly.
No way.
No, they're not great at all. The egg is watery and horrible. But apart from that, they're really everything else that you walk into a supermarket and buy on the hoof. Yeah, not making from scratch, ready to go, has sugar in it.
No.
And that is ridiculous.
Totally crazy. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts today. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for coming in.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. This week, I am joined by Clare Pope for the first time.
Hi, AJ.
And Clare Hernandez, who you may remember from some of our past episodes. Welcome back, Clare.
Thank you.
Clare, what is ultra-processed food?
I think there's lots of ways you can define it. For me, the way I always think about it is if you've got a product which when you look at the label on the packaging that's basically got ingredients in that you don't recognise, that aren't in your food cupboard at home, then it's probably ultra processed. So, you know, things like E-numbers, emulsifiers, that sort of thing.
That's really interesting, because there are some things that sound really dodgy on a label, aren't there, like citric acid, but actually that's just lemon juice, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. You might have some lemon juice in your cupboard at home, so that's okay, I think. I think it's just things that you don't recognise that would be used in a manufacturing process rather than something you would create in your own home and be familiar with all of the ingredients.
For example, bread, I think, is a good example. I think a lot of people think that isn't ultra-processed, and really it depends, obviously, where you get your bread from. I don't think many of us have time to make bread ourselves at home.
No, not like the pandemic when we're all making our own bread from starters. Yeah.
But if you're getting it from a bakery, then that's obviously pretty good. If you're buying the sort of long life bread, that's where we're sort of treading into ultra-processed territory, because it's full of preservatives and things like that.
So it's the kind of stuff that doesn't go hard after... Like bread should go hard, shouldn't it? After about 3 days, it should be hard and stale and perfect for breadcrumbs, in fact.
And the fact that it's, you know, the stuff that we're buying is lasting maybe 2 or 3 weeks is great from a sort of reducing waste point of view. But from an ingredients perspective, that's quite alarming, really. A lot of this is about getting back to scratch cooking, isn't it? And we're all leading such busy lives, it's quite difficult to sort of carve that time out to cook from scratch. But I think if you do, I actually think you're less likely to waste food, because you've gone to the effort of making it. And like you say, you're going to sort of become a bit more creative with what's in your fridge, and you're going to use it up.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I think it's quite interesting, actually, what Claire's saying. The flip side of that, of course, is that ultra-processed foods like ready meals, they're a convenience.
Yeah.
You know, you buy them because you're tired, you're in a rush, you just want something quick, you can shove it in the microwave, whatever. And I think that, you know, taking that out of the equation is actually quite difficult. It's about changing habits, and that takes time, right? It takes maybe a bit of education as well. Maybe you need some recipe inspiration.
I agree. I think we've really been sort of suckered into this convenience lifestyle, haven't we? And of course, what they didn't tell us is actually it's all very addictive. So getting out of that cycle is quite difficult when your body's craving the sugars and the sort of carbs and things that are in it.
Where do you see the HFSS element kind of intersecting, I suppose, or ending, and the ultra-processed food bit starting? Because a lot of the negativity around unhealthy food, for the want of a better phrase, a catch-all phrase, we think of now as being the really high sugar, the things that spike your sugar levels, make you tired later, salt, which we know puts a lot of strain on your heart and your body. But this is another level, isn't it? This is the actual process element of the food.
I think probably my gut would tell me that the link between those is they overlap, definitely. HFSS products are part of the ultra-processed set, if you like. Then the ultra-processed set also includes some other stuff, potentially. So I think that the interesting thing about that, when you start to think of it like that, is, you know, what's the solution? Is it that we should be taxing these kinds of foods?
I don't know. Do you remember going to see Henry Dimbleby speak on about the National Food Strategy? Mm-hmm. And he was absolutely fascinating and terrifying in equal measures, as he was kind of laying out what we can probably expect to see from people over the next 100 years if we continue to eat in the way that we have. The other element, which I don't think went down marvellously with the government, was how, if we actually look back historically over time, every time the government has taxed or got massively involved in controlling what people should and shouldn't eat, with the whole kind of saturated fat debate of the 80s or 70s and 80s, which got everyone to stop eating pure butter and eat margarine, a very ultra-processed food, and how actually, if you look at the stats, our health got significantly worse when they interfered with that.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a massive backlash on that now, and that's become clear with the sort of whole milk story that we're seeing in the news. Plant-based milks still have their place, but I think people are appreciating the nutrient value in whole milk once again.
Are you referring to the oat milk sugar spike article that
Yes.
theme that came out?
Yes.
Yeah, so that was really interesting. I felt awful about that. I give my kids oat milk. My daughter is lactose intolerant. She's had oat milk for a long time. And I do give her extra vitamin D because I know that that's really important. But she drinks oat milk for breakfast every day. And apparently that's giving her a massive sugar spike.
Yeah, it's so tough, isn't it? I think particularly as a parent, because you're being given all of this information and actually some of it's conflicting. And so you're having to sort of reevaluate all the time. Is this the right thing? You know, should I be going back to this? Yeah, I think it's an evolving discussion for sure.
Do you think consumers understand it?
Well, there is a stat from Mintel that says 70% of consumers try to avoid ultra-processed foods. I'm slightly sceptical about that, because I think, in my mind, I think it would be lower than that, although that apparently that is lower than the European, our European counterparts, who we know are really good at, you know, eating the Mediterranean diet and, you know, really unprocessed food.
Is that because they're naturally already doing it? It's not such an issue for them to discuss it, do you think?
I think it all goes back to a bit what Claire was saying, you know, some of these habits we develop growing up. If you're used to being fed more ultra-processed food, that's what you develop the taste for. And literally your body becomes addicted to that. So it becomes very hard to break that cycle. Whereas, you know, in some of the European countries, we see the different diets. And obviously, if you've been brought up eating that way, it's going to be a lot easier for you to maintain
and in
that.
a lot of those countries, mealtime is sacrosanct, and it often takes many hours to put together that meal. Over here, I don't think we sort of value that time enough. We're not taking the time to prepare our meals, to sit down together as a family, perhaps as much as we used to.
Where does the responsibility lie? Obviously, with the individual, we choose what we put into our bodies. We choose what we put into our families' bodies. But is there a responsibility from governmental level? Is it the manufacturers? Is it the food companies? Like, where do you think the responsibility for this needs to come from?
I think that responsibility needs to be shared, right? Probably my first port of call would be the government. I do think that people need to be better educated. And if they're not taxing and they're not controlling what people do, which is maybe not the right thing to do, they should be feeding out information, doing more research into this kind of thing and studies. And then I think also manufacturers, brands have a responsibility to make products that are good for people, right? Good for the planet, good for people. And then, the individual too. If that all worked together and we came together, then maybe we'd be in a better place.
I would just add to that retailers as well. I think they can be held responsible. It's the buyers that are choosing what goes onto the shelves. And we know from the job that we're in, some of the amazing products that are out there and available to buyers. I'd really like to see them choosing better. And I would also say that schools, I think, could play a bigger part in educating children on diet. I think it's getting better from what I've seen with my children, but I think there's still more work to be done there.
Agree. I do think education in schools has got better. So the worst ultra-processed foods would be things like bread, breakfast cereal bars, flavoured yogurts, fruit drinks, milk drinks, baby food. Wow.
Yeah, I think just going back to what you were saying about looking at how some of these products are marketed, I think some of the most alarming products are ones that almost claim to be healthy. For example, yogurts. When they say they're zero fat, people are, I believe, they are picking them up and buying them thinking that they're actually good for their body. But what's actually happening is the fat is actually replaced with sweeteners and all sorts of things to try and make it taste better, because if you strip all of that fat out, it's going to be really runny and not taste great. So they're actually having to replace that with something. It's a bit worrying, I think.
The concept then is that you've thinned it out. You've thinned out all this sort of fat, the substance, the protein that makes you feel full. So you end up eating 3 or 4 of them rather than just having one full fat, pure, natural yogurt, maybe with a little bit of honey in it or something like that, where these are 2 ingredients, you know what they are, you know what process that yogurt has to go through, and it's very minimal comparative to, a processed yogurt or something, and eating it in its pure form.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really valid point, actually. I think in our household, that's kind of what we've tried to do, is kind of strip back and go back to the simple things. So, instead of having lots of flavoured yogurts, as you say, in the fridge, we have, Greek yogurt. So we'll have that with some honey or some fruit, or we'll cook some muffins from scratch and put some banana in and a little bit of sugar. But, you know what's gone into it. So you're kind of, that's a great way, I think, of circumventing it. And if that becomes part of your weekly routine, maybe you have a little bake-off on a Sunday afternoon. I mean, it's literally half an hour, for some simple recipes. And I think it can really work.
I think that's a really good point. And they do say preparing food, doing things with your hands, with the tips of your fingers, actually makes you happier. Oh. How good's that? Thank you so much. That was really, really helpful and really interesting to hear. So thank you, both of you, Clare Pope and Clare Hernandez, for joining us in the studio today.
Thank you.
Thanks, AG.
You've been listening to Food Rebels. We broadcast live at 5 every Wednesday through radio shows and stations around the UK and further afield, as well as podcasting apps, all the usual ones, iTunes, Spotify, Audible. If you're interested to appear on the show, please do get in touch on hello@foodrebels.co.uk, as we'd love to hear from you, especially if you've got a rebellious story to tell us.